Welcome to Lift Your Leg. This is Monique Cansey from the Naughty Dog in Victoria, BC, author of As a Dog Thinketh.
And Jill Brown from Calgary, Alberta, the Bag Lady.
Tonight we have with us Dominic Scarberry from the Empowered Canine to talk about tracking. And last year, Dominic won the Universal Seeger at the WUSV with his dog. Dominic, welcome.
Hi, thanks for having me.
Thanks. All right, we're talking about tracking. We both do IGP style. However, there will be plenty of tips here for AKC people and CKC trackers also. So, if we're starting with young dogs,
hmm
I'm being tough on you right from the start here.
That's
You
fine.
once said to me, "What are you working on the same field or different fields with a young dog when you're first starting them?"
I prefer to start in something that I can have relative access to very quickly with young dogs especially. So I will use the same field quite a lot, and then once they're proficient in that terrain, whether it be, a park grass or a hay or as you Monique know, we sometimes have to track in dirt, whether it's dirt or something like that. I will go into those different terrains until the dog is proficient, even as a young dog, and then slowly progress into different types of terrain, vegetation, what have it.
Okay.
Yeah,
You start your corners way sooner than I do.
I do indeed. I started on the very first track.
Oh, wow. Way sooner than I do.
Oh, yeah.
What's your theory with this? Why?
So the main reason why that in the style of tracking and the method of tracking that we do corners to start is because a lot of the times when you go to trial, dogs will fail because they miss the corners or they overwalk the corner or they can't find the corner. So right from the start, we want to ensure that they understand change of direction and which way it is coming from, right? Whether it's the left or the right, which in IGP and I believe also CKC, they're mostly 90-degree turns, but I'm not
Yes.
100% sure on the CKC aspect. Um, there are advanced tracking titles in both where they are not 90 degrees. They can be an acute turn to where they are anywhere from 30 to 60 degrees or an arc of like 30 meters where they have to follow. But generally speaking, most turns are 90 degrees. So even in the beginning, in the method that I've learned for the past quite literally 30 years, we always start with a turn because we want them to understand and be confident and sure in the change of the direction that the track is going.
At the beginning, are your straights serpentines or are they straights with corners?
They are straights with corners. So, an example, a puppy track, let's say we take a 12-week-old puppy out for its first track ever. I'm probably only going to get about 30 to 40 paces, let's say, into a track, about 20, maybe 15 in a turn, and then maybe another 10 to 15, even call it 20 to 30. Depends on the dog's brain, we'll call it. As puppies, they can be more ADHD and maybe not have as much food drive or be interested in the food. So even from that point, it'll just be a straight line, straight leg, 10, 15, 20 paces with a turn, and then another 10, 15 paces, and then a big jackpot at the end. One, I want the dog to understand that there is value in putting your nose to the ground and going. So we have food in every step. But also, I want them to learn that the track is drive building as well. So that's why we put the big jackpot at the end.
Thinking about that. Your food is visible or buried?
I tend to kind of bury it. So what I like to do is I'll try to make a divot in the ground with my heel. Obviously, depending where you live, it's more difficult than others. I know living in Calgary, it's hard ground quite a lot of the time. So trying to make a divot into the ground can be challenging. But out where you live, Monique, it's more
Oh,
soft and easy to make that divot. And the reason why we make the divot is because when it's below the level of the ground, it will help teach a deeper nose into the track, and they'll be able to take in more of the disturbance and have a better understanding of where the track is going.
that makes sense. Back to corners.
hmm
I know you have food all through the corner at the beginning,
Yes.
but then also I saw with somebody's more experienced dog, you still had food throughout the corner.
Yes.
Obviously, you've gone away from it at some point there in the
Mhm.
middle stages of teaching the dog. What's the reason for putting it back in there?
The reason mostly is because I want them to still be sure in taking the turn. So I don't necessarily put it right on the turn. So you know how we do our 90-degree turns with in the IGP style tracking. I have a tendency to now, instead of putting it like where my toe and my heel would meet,
Yep.
putting it just in the toe of that step that goes over the top, right? To
Okay,
make the
that
turn.
makes more sense to me.
So they have to get to the corner, they turn their head one direction or the other, and then they're like, oh, it goes this way, and then it's almost an immediate reward. Following that, then obviously into the leg, we have another piece of food to then again reward them, like, oh, yes, this was the proper way, continue going this way.
Okay, that makes total sense.
Yeah.
Okay. When you have your young dog,
Hmm.
are you picking, like within your field, are you going at easy condition times or are you picking challenges?
I try to
Should
make
I,
it
should
as
I list some to you?
feel free to.
Are you going to lay your track with the lines of the field or slightly against them?
I'll lay them with the field when I have a young dog starting out, and I'll try to make it as easy as possible starting out because I want them to have success and
Yep.
learn that through following the disturbance, they can get their reward, which in this instance is the food on the track. That also leads into, do we go morning or evening with these? Honestly, I've done both and I've had success doing both. Um,
Would you go
it, honest,
midday?
I would go midday with an experienced dog.
Okay.
One that is in our IGP community, IGP 3, you're getting ready for championships. Maybe you're traveling internationally. Maybe because as you and I both know, you could be tracking at 2 or 3 in the afternoon when you travel overseas to
Yep.
compete. Um, so when I'm getting ready to do that kind of preparation and going overseas and doing that kind of, yeah, I'll lay my track at 12:30. I'll let it sit for the hour. Maybe I let it sit for an hour 20 because, sometimes the organizers are disorganized and running late. So we run a little bit later. But I try to run it at some point in the heat of the day just to have that experience and be like, you still have to perform at the level that I would expect what at 7 a.m. or 7 p.m. when it's a little bit cooler and easier.
When we get to August and everything's turning to dust and is sparse, are you
Mhm.
still tracking your young dogs?
Yes, but I will go to irrigated fields, right?
Okay.
So in the area that we are in Calgary, there's a couple irrigated places that keep the grass nice and green. So for young dogs, up until they're about, I'd say 12-ish months, I will go there to make it again easy, have success, a positive experience amongst that. For my current dog, heck no. I will go into the crunchiest, driest, brown, most dead grass you can find, and you still have to track. Sorry about your luck.
Yep. I'm the same. What about wasps in August? Do you guys get lots of wasps in August with your food down on the track?
No, no, we don't get a lot of those. Actually, the bane of my existence since moving to Calgary and training here has been magpies and crows picking my track clean.
Me too.
The amount of rage that flows through my veins, even as I sit here thinking about it, just, oh, gets me every time.
Once in Calgary, I had a deer steal my article too.
Oh, that's a good one. That's a new one.
Oh dear. What impressed me most with your tracking was your loose line, but yet your dog was still in full drive.
Yes.
It's something I see very few people have. Generally, if someone has a loose line, I should say generally, but in my experience, the people that I've seen with loose lines, their
Hmm.
dogs tend to not be in drive or they're just eating food. How
Yeah.
do you get it?
I do it very meticulously, right? It's not just a process that I go to the track and I'm like, okay, well, today we're doing loose line. I slowly build into it. First, I only start doing loose line tracking once my dog is 100% proficient at articles. So I can be tracking, my dog comes to an article, immediately lays down. In that instance, probably about, I would guess, probably 10 feet or so, when I know an article is coming, I will let my line go completely loose. It's almost a cue to my dog because I'll be on a tight line. When the line goes completely loose, like, hey, there's something coming. You should pay attention. Be a little bit more cautious and thoughtful about what you're doing. If, for whatever reason, my dog were to walk the article, Monique, as you know, what I teach in walking the articles, it's just a gentle pull back, and I just keep helping them forward and just say track, track, track. If they keep deciding to walk it, I'll just keep pulling them back. I don't care if it takes me 20, 30 times of doing this. I want my dog to start indicating independently without any line influence, right? So that's also how I start teaching a loose line. Once they're super proficient at that, then I start doing it with corners. I start doing the same behavior at corners. So when I know I have a corner coming up, maybe I have it a washer or with some ribbon, or I have a tree that I turned at that I know it's there. As we're coming up to the corner, I'll let my line go completely loose. Maybe my dog starts to pick up speed. Ideally, if they're an intelligent dog and can learn quickly, then they understand that, oh, something is coming. I don't know what it is. It could be an article. Generally speaking, they'll start to like slow down, maybe start to hunker down because it's already been a cue for articles. And then that's where the corner happens and why we have the food placement as we do throughout the
Ah,
corners as
that makes
well,
sense.
right? So we
Okay.
bring a little bit more sureness, and then the dog's like, oh, okay, that's just a corner. That's fine. I know those, right? And then I start to play around with it as we progress throughout, you know, reps upon reps upon reps. The thing I love about tracking is that, unlike obedience, where you can fix something in a session and be like, you need to tweak this to do this, and you get the result almost immediately, tracking is literal miles and miles of hard work. And especially when we start trial prepping, it becomes almost like a game of chess. Like, this is what you did today, so now tomorrow I'm going to plan this, this, and this, and in anticipation of you doing this. That's kind of what I do even in the beginning when I start teaching the loose line, right? So
Yeah.
maybe in the beginning, my dog starts to be a little bit fast in the beginning because they have a lot of drive for the track. And then I make the line go completely loose. And then my dog's like, oh, crap, something's going to be here. Something's going to happen. So then they slow down. And then as they get into the track and they start to become a little bit more settled, then I slowly make the line not tight, but taut enough to where they know that it's okay to go forward. There's nothing else is going to be here until we get to an article, right? So I start to play around with it that way. And then ultimately, with my dog now, I can run my whole track with a loose line, and he's going to have the same intensity and drive and concentration as focus as he would if I was on a tight line.
That's pretty cool. Your game of chess that you speak of, I can so
Mhm.
relate and was very good at it with my last dog, a German Shepherd. It's so different with a Malinois, or is it just Harry?
I think it's just your dog because I've seen him tracking.
Oh dear, Harry. Be nice.
He's an odd duck, but I enjoy the process that I've had in the conversations we've had of bouncing ideas back and forth.
Ah, 72, my aim for my next trial.
1 point
Big
better.
gold man. Oh shit. Okay, what else do we have to ask you? I We talked about starts. So,
Mhm.
and I think we do something very similar. So for me, there's either food in my scent pad, or there's food in one of the first 10 paces out, or there's food 70 somewhere in there, up to 70 paces out.
Mhm.
You do similar for starts, I think.
Yeah, so again, starting a young dog, I will
Yeah.
always have food in the scent pad because that's honestly where we're starting to be judged, at least in the IGP portion of things.
Yes.
So when I start, there's always food in the scent pad, whether it's something high value or what have you. Whatever the dog values is primarily what I use in the tracking. Once the dog becomes, again, a little bit more apt and have a little bit more drive, and maybe they start wanting to go more, and maybe I'm starting to think like, oh, maybe in the next 6 months I'm going to think about trialing, right? I'll start to fade it out, and then I start to play around with distance, right? I tend to think of things in our leash length, right?
Yep.
In IGP, we have a 33-foot leash that we have to track back behind the dog, 10 meters. So I know my tracking leash is 20 of my tracking paces. However, I lay a track, it's 20 of those is one of my leash length. So maybe I start to slowly fade that food out from the scent pad. Maybe I go half a leash length or 10 paces. Then I go a full leash length. Then I go maybe 25, 30, 45. I play around with the distance. I always make it a little bit random because in tracking, we have to be random in order to bring a bit of reliability, in my opinion.
Yes.
We can we cannot always be in the same pattern and stuck in the same pattern because just like dogs, people can be stuck in the same pattern of, okay, I go out 200 paces, I make my right turn, I go another 100 paces, I make another turn, I do this, I do that. And that's all fine and well because the dog also has to see those kinds of things. However, it's not good training, in my opinion. It's not going to lead to success for the trial and the competition, which is what we ultimately want and what we strive and aim for. So even in the trial prep, I'll play around with it. In At an IGP 3 level, it's 100 paces minimum to our first article. Doesn't mean that the article is going to be right at 100 paces. So I might even go from my start out 100 paces and then I'll have my first piece of food,
Okay.
right? Just to bring that, like, all you have to do is keep tracking, keep going, be concentrated, focus on the task at hand, and then good things will happen, right? You get rewarded via food, via on the track, right?
Yep.
Subsequently, when we start thinking about IGP1, which in my opinion can be the most challenging because it's your first time out tracking with this dog in a trial setting, so you don't exactly know what's going to happen. There's a lot of variables that you don't quite know. You have an idea, especially when you have experience. That being said, sometimes it doesn't go exactly how we plan. The nice part about it in an IGP1 is the article is a minimum of 50 paces out. So it's very easy to start playing around with, okay, well, I can have food at 30 paces or 40 paces and then have my article at 50 or 60 and then have my turn up ahead at however many paces after that, right?
Yep.
But that then leads me into the IGP3 tracking again, where you don't know where everything is. The nice part about the one is that you know where everything is because you laid it. So you can plan for that. In a three, you don't, which is why I like to play like this random guessing game of, even with my dog now, I'm about 5 weeks out from competition. And even now I'm playing this guessing game of like, I know we haven't tracked because it's been snowy in Calgary yet again, but maybe I'll go 80 paces and there's food. And then I'll do every 80 paces going into my article, or I'll go 80 paces and then 40 article and then 20, 30, 40 corner. And in that 20, food, 30 paces, food, 40, then my turn comes and there's food on the turn, right? Um,
So with your food there, you're using a singular piece and another big stretch?
Yeah, I'll use like a single piece. I usually keep it around the size of like a loonie, like a toonie, maybe a one
Okay.
dollar coin. It depends on, again, it depends on the terrain. If it's more challenging, I will put a larger piece. If it's easy, I'll make it the size of a dime. right? Just to, it's like, it's easy. You don't have to work as hard, but I want you to still pay attention. So I'll put smaller food. So it's like, I know where this piece of food is. So I know if you're not concentrated and you're not showing good focus, that you're going to miss it. And then I know in that instance what to do next for the next track.
Are you using, like, when you're using the big chunks, is it something they have to stop and chew and relax and
No. So when I start puppies, I want to use something that's easily chewable and that they can basically take a bite of, swallow, and keep going. In the US, when I was living there, I used Billjack. And anyone who knows about Billjack,
Yes.
it is like puppy crack. That's what I used to start all my puppies on. Now that I moved to Canada and Billjack isn't readily available, unfortunately, I
So
use
sad.
it
Bill
really
Jack's so easy.
it's so easy. It's easy to like the frozen food, especially because you can
Yeah,
like shape it into like balls and like have them all planned out, and
yeah,
you can throw it in your freezer and then thaw. It's great. But and it has the thing with it is that it has so much odor that it really drives that puppy to really search into the disturbance for the food and be rewarded for searching that disturbance for it, right?
yeah.
Since moving here, I've had to obviously adapt because Billjack isn't readily available. I like to use, I can't remember what it's called. It's either Fresh Pet or like Stella and Chewy's. It's like frozen kibble bit, like raw
Fresh pet.
kibble.
Yep.
Thank you. Yeah, like frozen
Not too
kibble
bad.
pieces, which kind of makes it challenging during the summer because you have to hurry up, get it out of your freezer, pack it, drive, you know, if you're lucky, 5 minutes, and hope it doesn't thaw in that amount of time. As the dog progresses, I try to fade away from less odorous food and something that is still high value. So, for my experienced dogs, I like to use a raw ground meat of some sort. I don't really have a preference, whatever the dog values the most. So, I don't care if it's beef, I don't care if it's pork, chicken, turkey, venison, bison, kangaroo, whatever that you can get your hands on, as long as it is a raw ground meat that the dog finds valuable in that way. Um, I make it into like, I don't know, 3/4, half-pound pucks. Throw it in the freezer. Whenever I need it, I'll take it out, thaw it. Not so much to where it's like a mush, but enough
Yep.
to where it's still malleable and I can still form it into, my dime-sized, nickel-sized, loony-sized balls of food. And the nice part about it being it raw and ground is that I can take off however much I need, right? I don't always have to have, oh, I made a ball this big, but I need one this big now. I can be like, oh, I need a little bit more. So I'll just take off a little bit more from that frozen hockey puck, we'll call it, and put it down in place.
Cool.
Yeah.
Can you share with us then, when you're getting ready for trial, your article series?
Oh, my lovely art. Do you mean the restarts or for everything
Yes.
else?
Rewarding the article versus rewarding the restart.
Yes. So I do three different types of restarts when I start to get ready for trial. And this is in my trial prep stage, whether it's and every dog is different. Sometimes they need more time to prepare, sometimes they need less time. Our friend Courtney, she needs, 7, 8 weeks to get tests ready for trial. Whereas I can basically get Bola ready now in like 3.5, 4 weeks for trial.
Don't be mean to Courtney.
I'm not being mean. I just give her a hard time about it. I still think it's funny. So, in the three restarts that we do for the tracking, the first is when my dog indicates the article, I will come up and reward the article with food. Then I'll pick up my article. For restarts, I have a ritual of where I pet the eyes and I'll place food. So I do a lot of, it's basically just classical conditioning when we really break it down. I always pet the eyes, there's food there, even in my training prior to this trial prep stage, because the trial prep is a whole other beast in and of itself. So when my dog indicates reward for the indication, article comes up, I will pet and I won't place food, but maybe I'll have food a leash length out. So my dog wants to restart and have that drive to go forward, right?
Okay.
So then I restart my dog, so on and so forth. The next article, I won't reward the indication, but I will pick up the article, pet the eyes, and then I will place food there. And then at that one, maybe then my food after the article, quote unquote, will be 60, 70 paces down the track because I'm already rewarding your restart here, right? That already has enough for my dog to be like, oh, I get up and I go. Oh, I get rewarded right away. Cool, perfect. The third one is that I don't do either. The third is that when my dog indicates the article, there's no reward. I pick up the article, I pet, cover the eyes, do not place food, stand up, and restart. Ideally, if you've done it correctly and had the classical conditioning, you get the same restart picture there as you would if there was food. The first couple times that I start doing this with my current dog, because he's so conditioned that every time I pet, there's going to be food. He's kind of a dumb boy, which I love because he's easy to trick this way. That the he'll kind of stop and be like, "Oh, it's supposed to be here. It's supposed to be here. Like, where is it?" And he'll stop and kind of search. Unfortunately, in the sport of IGP, it's a deduction because they are not showing quote unquote commitment to the track, which I think is dumb. However, the rules are what the rules are. In that instance, then I will just help him forward and be like, no, no, track, go forward. It's okay. You can go forward. And then he'll go forward again, a leash length, and then find food. And he's like, oh, well, that was easy. And that's just how I balance out like them not getting that restart food and wanting to go forward, right? Because they're always so conditioned that that food is going to be there that I need to push it out. So they're like, okay, food's not here, but I know it's coming up. It's going to be up here. I promise you it's going to be up here. That's what I want my dog thinking constantly. And when you have a dumb boy, it's very easy to trick him that way.
And when you have a clever boy like Harry,
I would do the same, but I would play with the distance, not always the leash length. Maybe it has to be 10 paces, or maybe it has to be 30, but always playing with that to be like, no, no, it's okay. You go forward.
as you say all of this, you make me feel very undisciplined in my training. Thanks. All right. What environmental factors are you deliberately teaching?
In what way?
Hills, change of terrain,
Ah,
wind,
love this. So,
ponds with wind, that kind of thing.
yes. So, a perfect example is last year when I was preparing for the Universal, it was in Switzerland. And I always thought of Switzerland of these lovely rolling hills and mountains and this beautiful cityscape and everything, which it is, don't get me wrong. However, I thought of, well, if it's like that, how I'm imagining it and what the pictures and what, Facebook and Instagram always show you these beautiful scenes, chances are we're probably going to be tracking on a hillside, right? So I
I
found a
was.
field. I found, yeah, see, even you. I think you even told me that you tracked on a hillside. So I found a field that's relatively close to my home, and there's a fairly steep hill, and I would go up and down the hill and lay my track that way, just to have my dog exposed to going up and coming back down. Maybe indicating an article on the hill because you don't know what can happen. Sometimes track layers are not the most intelligent people, so they might even put an article on the side of the hill. So I even practice those sort of things just to do it. I don't do a healthy diet of it, meaning I don't do it every day or every track, but maybe one in every 10, maybe every 7 if my dog really needs it, I would show him that kind of picture. Another big one that I've noticed even at a couple of the championships recently in the prairies, recently last year, the CWDF, the All Breed National Championship, was in
Yep.
Edmonton. They used a sod farm. Beautiful, gorgeous sod. However, there's a watering system on the sod, and it's
Mm.
on those like big swinging, rotating arms with the tires. So there's ruts. There can be ruts in the ground, right?
Oh, yeah.
So seeing that and knowing that, I'm like, wow, that's a smart idea. That's actually challenging for some dogs. So me being me, I would go track my dog and find some of these ruts, and I would go even like parallel, not parallel, but I would almost follow the rut on the outside of it. just so my dog would be like, oh, we just track around this curve. Naturally, when I make the first turn, my dog wants to make it at a 90 instead of following the curve of that tire track. Or maybe my dog wants to go and put his head into the tire track. If that happens, good luck to you. I don't think many dogs are going to get out of that because there's so much disturbance and odor and everything going on there that if it happened in trial, I wish you the best. I don't think your dog's making it out of it, kind of thing. But I wanted to expose my dog to that sort of thing. So I would lay my track around these arcs and do that sort of training. Or, large bodies of water. I would go right up to the edge and do all these sorts of things. Again, this is a very experienced dog, a dog that's traveled overseas multiple times now. I've traveled across the country in Canada tracking and training and trialing him. So I like to test my limits and the boundaries that I can kind of push and do. But it's all things that I think the dogs need to see because you never know what's going to happen in trial. You can get some track layers that they'll they think they're going straight, but they're following this tire track arc, and your dog has to be proficient at following this. Or maybe they don't think about it and they turn up a hillside and there's an article or doing something like that. I try to prepare for any and every situation that I can concoct in my brain. It's not always the same flat level beautiful ground that we track on all the time. I do like to throw in challenges and to make things difficult to kind of push those limits and be like, it doesn't matter where we are, what's going on, where this track is going, you still have to perform the same.
I think it's the hard thing with a young green dog because they just haven't had the same time to have all the experiences yet. For things such as gopher holes, mole hills, tire
Hmm.
ruts, like Harry hasn't seen any of that yet because we don't have that here.
Yeah, I have a a disdain for tire ruts because in Denmark when I was competing, that's kind of I was training for tire ruts all the time because of the training fields we were in, but I was always putting food after them to like build reassurance and confidence of like just go through them. And then on my trial track after the second or third one that we went through and there was no food, Bolo just stopped and looked at me and was like, the hell are we doing out here? I haven't gotten any piece of food, which, you know what? Looking back, completely my fault, not his fault. He was just doing what he knew to do.
That sounds more like my training. Well
Yeah.
done. All right, going back to my training, if your
Hmm.
tracking leg is loose, what would you do to tighten it up?
There's any number of things. It depends on why the leg is loose, right? Is the dog casting left or right? Is maybe there's a change of speed? Maybe the drive is coming up. Maybe they're not as obedient for articles. Who knows in terms of loose? I'm gonna guess that you mean some casting like left and right of the leg.
It's actually, well, if we're actually picking on Harry here, it would be he's thinking too much about corners. So he's thinking they are where
Mm.
they're not. He's just too much checking.
In that instance, I would try to bring a little bit more sureness into it. So maybe even doing a longer leg than you typically would, or putting an article or a small article. My normal go to for people in this instance, and I know you have a trial coming up, which seems a bit counterintuitive to do this. I would put more food to kind of
Okay.
help be like, hey, no, it's this, follow this. This is what you want. And I'm not like a buffet, not like every 10, 15, 20 steps, but if you only had two or three pieces, maybe up it to six, seven, eight, right? Just to bring a little bit more sureness and being like, oh no, you keep going straight, you get rewarded for doing this. Quit worrying about and checking for all these other things.
Okay. Good answer. How would you get a deeper nose?
Again, kind of depends on the situation. Are we talking into the wind or are we
I,
talking in general?
I was just writing that frantically. That's the second part to this question. So, no, in general for first.
In general, I like to bury the food, like I said earlier, with making a divot. I have found that through just, again, kind of classical conditioning, And with a less odorous food like a raw meat, they have a tendency to start putting their nose deeper and deeper into the terrain to find and get their reward that way.
Okay. And then into the wind is the next question.
I figured. Into the wind, there's three things that I like to do if they have a high nose. Generally speaking, dogs always will have a high nose when the wind is coming into their face because there's a lot more odor and there's a lot more scent and disturbance coming that way.
Yeah,
So it's easier for them to just pick up their head and be like, oh, I can air scent my way to whatever is out there, whether it's an article, whether it's food, whether it's like doing search and rescue or whatever, right? It's a very natural occurrence for dogs to do that. And it's something that can be challenging to fix. The three main things I like to do is one, I will put a large piece of food, like maybe triple, quadruple size what I would normally put on the track, shortly after an article. So my dog almost smells, I want almost the smell of the food to overpower what the scent of the article would be. Or I want them to think, oh, I think that's an article coming, but I smell the food and I know that's a big piece of food, so I want to go get to it. So their drive starts to overcome it and they want to get to the food. However, I demand that they have good obedience and you have to lay at the article first. That's the first way that I
and
like
if
to do
they
it.
don't,
The second, what, in terms of like skipping the article?
yes.
Well, I have to know where everything is, first off, and not allow them to do that.
Okay.
The second is it can be a little bit more risky, but I found, at least with my dog, I get a better result. The second is I do the opposite of that. I take the food and make it very small, to again, like the size of a dime, and I put it three, maybe five steps before an article, and then I demand that they have to pick up that piece of food. Usually, I don't demand that the dog picks up food throughout the track unless it's in that instance or in my article restarts. If it's in this instance, I demand that they pick up that piece of food. And then obviously, again, just through classical conditioning, when they start to smell that article into the wind, you'll start to see the behavior change to where the nose starts to go deeper. Instead of them picking their head up, they'll go, oh no, I want my nose deeper because I know there's going to be food here. I'm going to get rewarded before this article. I know what's coming.
I love
Ideally,
that.
it,
That's very clever.
ideally, it translates to trial. And again, if we've done it correctly, it should translate. I won't say it will because there's nothing certain about dog trialing and training. The third is I will do a combination of both to where I'll put a big piece of food after and that small piece of food before.
Okay.
There is one other that I actually just thought of. Instead of doing a small piece of food, I'll put a small article. So maybe one that's a third of a size of a regular article. I will place there and be like, that's fine that you want to go to this big one, but you need to be paying attention because there's the smaller one here that can be coming up.
If they skip the smaller piece of food, what would you do?
I demand that they pick it up. That's like one of the only, again, in that instance, it's one of the only pieces of food that I almost demand that they pick up.
So are you slowly pulling them back and then like frantically telling them to get it or what?
No, usually I'll know when it's coming because I can see the article and I'll say, okay, about this many paces before I had food. And if they don't pick it up, I'll almost like pull them back and make them like keep retracking until they find the food,
Okay.
right? Again, if they're dumb, maybe you have to help them and be like, oh, look, there's food here. And they go, oh, wow, that's magical. I didn't expect that. And then again, just through classical conditioning, then they'll start to understand, oh, it's coming right before. I know there's an article coming, but there's something before it that I have to find.
Okay. Thank you.
Hmm.
Love that. Trial prep. You've talked
Yes.
about some of your trial prep stuff. What other stuff are you doing in advance of your trial?
Right now, I'm not quite in trial prep. I'm starting to like lead up to it. So I kind of think of my training in 4 stages. There's my training, there's my pre-trial prep, my trial prep, and then my competition. I'm kind of in that pre-trial prep stage right now, so this is where I start pushing food from the start into the first leg, or after the turn, I'll start to push food down the leg. Maybe instead of 10 paces, maybe I'll start to have it 30 or 40, and then the next one I'll have it 20, and then the next one will be 50 or something like that. Big one that I try to convey to people that I don't think a lot of people think about doing is that they need to have an empty start to at least the first article, which means nothing from the start until after the first article. So in an IGP1 track, it's easy. 50, 60 paces of nothing to an article should be relatively easy for a dog. In an IGP3, planning where it can be anywhere from 100 to 150 paces can be a little bit more challenging.
Yeah. How often are you doing that of nothing to that first article?
So I tend to do what actually my dad, who's this whole tracking system is based around, and his ideas and everything. I can take no credit for it. It is his ideas. I've just had success at an international level using it. It's a ratio track. So what I mean by that is how many tracks of training can I do and then test. Usual rule of thumb for dogs, that at least that my dad and I have found, is about 5 to 1, which means 5 training tracks, 1 test track. And that test track is the empty start till after the first article. That being said, some dogs need it more frequently. I had a dog back in 2010, 2011, 2012 that he was a 3 to 1 type test track dog. My dad's giant schnauzer that he took to the Schnauzer World Championship and was a 2-time regional champion in the US, in arguably the hardest region in the US. He was more of like a or 8 to 1 type dog. So it all kind of depends on what your dog needs. That's kind of where the training comes in, right? When I'm like, oh, 6 months before trial, that's plenty of time. But it's not, because I have to figure out what my ratio track is, what I can do, how many tracks before, how many do I need after, so on and so forth. And most people don't think about it, but 6 tracks, we don't necessarily track 2 or 3 times a day, because that's almost counterproductive sometimes. So it'll take me a week to figure out, is my dog 5 to 1? Okay, cool. Maybe he's not. Maybe it takes me 8, 9 tracks to figure it out and be like, okay, if I do 7 training tracks and then I have 1, is that good? Yeah, it's okay. What if I shorten it? Okay, that was better. What if I shorten it again? Oh, that's his best, right? At that ratio. Maybe you need to even go shorter and shorter and shorter, or you need to extend it out. The hard part about it, with it being in regards to international competition, is that you don't know what day you'll be tracking. So I like to try to set up that ratio track, my quote unquote test track, as that 6th track in my set. So leading up to the Universal this year in France, I'll run 5 training tracks and then try to time my test track as that 6th track, my competition track. What's nice about club trials is that, okay, you're tracking on Saturday, for instance, Monique.
Yeah.
That, okay, my dog's a 5 to 1. I'm tracking Saturday, which that means it has to be my test track, which means it has to be number 6. Does my dog do better on day 3 of tracking after a day off? Do they do better on the first day? Do they do better if I do 5 in a row and then that's number 6? Like, that's also something that we have to think about when we go into this trial prep. What day does my dog track best after a day off?
Jill's glaring at me, asking these questions through her eyes. It's not nice, Jill. You haven't said anything this whole set. You just keep looking at me meanly.
No, it's because I don't know tracking. I'm just absorbing it all.
Oh, dear. Rotten person. Now I'm lost. Where am I at? Oh, I have a good question. What
Hmm.
non-tracking pieces are you training for trial?
Actually, that's a good question. I always like to train my downs away from me, right? In IGP, we have a send away with a down at the other end of the field. So that's an easy concept to train. But even just free walking my dog, there's a provincial park that's kind of in the city that I'll just take my dog and we go on hikes and walks through there. And I'll even test my down in there because I want my dog to be comfortable laying away from me. Because in trial, again, we're 10 meters back, we're 33 feet back. My dog has to have some comfortability and be sure that he is going to lay down when he indicates the articles. So I kind of trained that sort of piece away from my tracking. But
Any kill?
otherwise, not really, honestly. A lot of my tracking training is in my track laying and keeping notes on what he did this day with this wind direction at this time with this temperature and this field condition or whatever. Most people keep notebooks. I know my wife, Cassandra, she keeps a notebook and she says, we tracked at this field on this date at this time. The wind direction was coming out of the northwest. It was 22 degrees. Whereas I can sit there and go, okay, the wind's coming that direction. We did this, we did that, we did this. It just comes from years upon years of tracking and training and keeping mental notes for what I need to do next, right? But
Thank you.
no, a lot of the tracking training other pieces, I the main thing is just teaching like the articles away from the track first, but that's about it. Generally speaking, if a dog has good obedience behavior, you can have pretty successful tracking.
How do you get your dog to the scent pad?
I like to lure to start. So even now, I'll take food and I'll lure, stop, check into my fake or real imaginary judge, and then I will again lure to the scent pad. I'll stay about 3 feet away from it. I give my dog food. Usually, my dog stands. I like to have my dog standing, and then I'll wait for my 3 to 5 seconds because I like to look at the judge for them to say, okay, you can start now. You can just, most of the time they'll say, you can start whenever you're ready, take your time, do whatever you want. But I like to have that confirmation, look at the judge and say, I'm ready. And they can say, okay, there's your track, begin. And then that's when I'll start. So I practice a lot of the obedience even before the track that way. And I always want my dog to be a little bit calm going up to the start flag. I want them to be thinking a little bit of obedience. If we just have all this raw power and raw genetics for tracking and doing all this and this drive and drive and drive, I don't think that will lead to success because you need obedience on the track. And what I mean by that is indicating articles, understanding and taking the proper corners and change of direction, understanding that they can't have a speed change where after the corner they have a tendency to pick up speed, or maybe in a longer leg they start to get a little bit more drive and build a little bit more drive. These are all types of things that I would consider obedience for the track and understanding that sort of thing. So I immediately want my dog to be thinking almost in that mindset of like, I have to be calm, under control, but still show drive and intensity.
A theoretical question for you, not my
Hmm.
issue currently. If your dog is refusing the lure getting to the track and is just kind of frantic wanting to get there, what are you going to do?
I would demand obedience in that instance, whether it's even just taking like a shorter leash and not using my long line and basically doing like either a lured heel or an actual heel to the start.
Okay.
In my opinion, if the dog enters the track in a frantic and hectic state of mind, then usually 9 times out of 10, they're going to start the track hectic and frantic and not be focused on the task at hand, which is tracking.
Absolutely. Imagine that it's happening.
Yeah.
What other questions do I have for you? Any that come to mind, Jill? Tightening corners.
That is an ancient Chinese secret. I cannot reveal that one.
Liar.
Actually, I have a better answer for you. Better answer for it. Ask Courtney what I did.
Spill it. Come on.
I do what's known as article turns in my dad's system. So what it is at the end of a leg when I want to turn, I'll place an article and I will do a big step off one way or the other. It depends on conditions, where everything's happening, whatever. I don't know the exact science behind it. I can't tell you everything about it because, quite frankly, I don't know. The only thing I do know is that it works.
So you're doing your straight leg.
Mhm.
Are you then putting an article at the end of that leg?
Yes, and then immediately
And then
90
stepping off
degrees.
left or right?
Correct.
Oh, okay.
I'm not sure. I know it. The only thing I know about it, and again, I've never really even talked to my dad about this sort of theory and his idea about it. I just know it works. His whole thing is that it brings confidence and sureness to the change of direction because the dog gets to the article, they can kind of settle a little bit. It's more of a mental break. They become a little bit more relaxed. They're more easily able to pick up which direction it's coming from, either left or right.
Okay. Cool.
Yeah, that's the big thing. I wish I knew more about it, to be quite frank. I've just never had that conversation with my dad about it.
Do you do step offs that are along the same lines? So it's a straight leg, a scent pad, and then a big step off left or right?
I do it a little bit differently, but yes, I do practice that because sometimes you have track layers that have a long stride and maybe take a big step for their turn. Instead of doing a scent pad at the end of that leg, when
Yeah.
I'll just come to a dead stop and then I'll take my step off left or right and then I make my scent pad.
Okay.
And then usually shortly after that, because you can see the dog's behavior change, you can see a little bit of stress, you can see any number of things start to happen a little bit. Shortly
I
after that, I'll place an article because I want them again to have a little bit of a mental break, be like, this is a safe spot. They can relax, have that mental break, be like, oh, okay, good, I found it. This is a good spot.
okay. I think in theory it might be similar to yours because I'm putting food on the scent pad, so he's stopping to eat, and then they just know left or right what way to go. But I don't know.
Maybe I would have to see it honestly to give you a more confident answer in that.
Yeah, and right now I'm not giving any tracking wisdom to anyone until after Saturday. Oh dear. Anything else you want to share, Dominic?
Not that I can think of, honestly. We've kind of touched on a little bit of everything in terms of tracking, in terms of, starting from a young dog to progressing to trial prep.
Yeah, I think so. I think
Yeah,
this is a very good. Thanks. Thank you so much.
you're
I will
welcome.
stick your website link in the show notes. And thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you for having me again.
Thanks.
Thanks.
Take care.
See you next
We'll
Tuesday.
see ya.
Bye.
Bye.